This demon king is absolutely goated. He is powerful enough to wipe out an entire nation, and he can even replace a king with a child without anyone realizing what happened. But despite all that power, there is one thing that genuinely terrifies him: a tiny little child. This little potato scares him so much that the demon king ends up hiding under a table, hoping she will never find him. And the reason this little potato scares him so much goes all the way back to their very first meeting, when she gave the demon king the full Toji Fushiguro treatment. So, let's go back to the beginning and start the story. Under the bright moonlight, an entire village burned to the ground. Flames devoured every house as terrified villagers screamed, ran for their lives, and desperately cried out for help. The village mages rushed forward, chanting barrier spells as layers of magical shields surrounded the village. But against absolute power, those barriers shattered like fragile glass. Boom! The mages were blasted away and annihilated in an instant. Without slowing his pace, the invader walked through the sea of fire, each step spreading despair. Helpless villagers collapsed to the ground, trembling as they watched death approach. A young boy desperately called out to his father, but before he could take another step, the demon's foot slammed into his back, pinning him to the ground. Seeing his son in danger, the boy's father charged forward with everything he had, swinging his weapon in desperation. An elderly mage gathered every ounce of his remaining mana and unleashed a massive fire spell. Boom! A blazing inferno swallowed the demon king whole, shaking the ground beneath everyone's feet. For a brief moment, hope returned to the villagers' eyes. Then the flames slowly faded. Standing in the center of the scorched earth was the demon king. Not even a scratch marked his body. He hadn't moved an inch. As he continued crushing the boy beneath his foot, he slowly turned toward the old man and asked in a calm, emotionless voice, "What do you do when an insect gets under your foot?" The old man stood frozen, his lips trembling as he struggled to answer. Before a single word could escape, his grandson's body was crushed beneath the demon king's foot. The sickening sound echoed across the silent battlefield. Without the slightest change in expression, the demon king spoke once more. Crushing something so insignificant is nothing more than a mindless reflex. The old man's body trembled with grief and helpless rage, yet fear chained him where he stood. Then the demon king slowly raised his hand. His arm shot forward with terrifying speed. The old man's skull exploded instantly. The poor old man was completely cooked by blue flames. It looked like he had been carrying an unbearable hatred toward humanity all along. He once had a peaceful life with a human girl, but fate had other plans. To him, humans were nothing but trash. She was the only exception. But one exception could never erase the countless monsters hiding behind human faces. No one knows exactly why he started slaughtering humans. Maybe they were the ones who took away the person he loved most. After killing the village elder, he didn't stop. One by one, the demon king wiped out everything in his path. The humans desperately tried to fight back, but it was completely hopeless. With a simple snap of his fingers, a massive magic circle appeared beneath their feet. In the next instant, blue flames erupted, burning both the mages and villagers alive without mercy. Yet despite the destruction around him, the demon king quietly turned away, wearing nothing but a sorrowful expression. Sometime later, he landed on a lonely bridge. He slowly raised his hand toward the distant village and coldly declared, "Because of human scum, the innocent always suffer. I'll cleanse this filth." A gigantic magic circle instantly formed above the village. As he prepared to destroy everything, memories of his beloved filled his mind. "Once everything has burned to the ground, then I'll finally find peace." His fingers were about to snap, but suddenly, the loud cry of a baby echoed through the air. The constant crying irritated him enough to make him change targets. Instead of destroying the village first, he walked toward the source of the sound, fully intending to kill the child. On a small boat rested a basket. With an emotionless face, he lifted the cover. Inside was a tiny baby, crying at the top of her lungs. He casually picked her up, holding her the way a monkey carries its young. But the moment he did, the crying stopped. Annoyed, the demon king raised a single finger toward the baby's forehead, ready to end her life instantly. Yet the little girl wasn't afraid. Instead, she looked up at his sparkling face. Then, with her tiny hand, she gently grabbed the very finger that was meant to kill her. For the first time, the demon king froze. The baby let out an innocent laugh. Then suddenly, boom! A brilliant blue light exploded from her tiny hand. An enormous surge of mana blasted straight into the sky. The demon king was completely speechless. In next moment, he looked just like Toji Fushiguro from Jujutsu Kaisen. Even after taking that unbelievable blast head on, he simply stood there smiling. Scene shifts to the countryside, where our king is carrying a little girl on his back. After traveling for a while, he finally stops at a small shop to buy food for the child. As soon as he steps inside, an old shopkeeper welcomes him. The old man notices the baby on his back and asks what he needs. Without wasting any time, our boy calmly replies, he need enough baby rations to last 1 month. The shopkeeper starts packing everything while chuckling to himself. Little ones can sure be a handful. Then he casually asks the baby's name. Our boy suddenly freezes. Why? Because he doesn't know her name either. After an awkward silence, he finally answers with a completely straight straight face. Her name is Child. The poor shopkeeper is left absolutely speechless. After handing over the rations, our boy prepares to leave. But before they do, the old man takes another look at the baby. His eyes widen. The little girl is releasing an enormous amount of pure aura. Oh boy, that's not a normal shopkeeper. The old man is actually a demon. Greed instantly fills his mind. If he devour that baby, he'll become more powerful than ever. A little later, our king continues his journey with the child resting safely in his arms inside a moving carriage. Meanwhile, the shopkeeper secretly follows behind them. Then, his body twists and expands into his true monstrous form. The demon licks his lips, unable to hide his hunger any longer. Without realizing who he's dealing with, the idiot casually walks up to the carriage. Then, with complete confidence, he says, "Hand over the child. Let me eat her." One single glance from our hero is enough to make the low-level demon break into a cold sweat. Before he can even react, a massive magic circle appears beneath his feet. His entire body freezes. He can't move a single muscle. Then countless shadowy hands burst from the circle below and begin dragging him into the darkness. The demon's face turns pale. Only noble demons can use this spell. He immediately realizes the terrifying truth. Why is someone like him walking among commoners? He remembers the terrifying rumors spreading across the land. A demon powerful enough to wipe out entire villages. The legendary demon king, Leoris, the very demon who once slew God himself. But then the low-level demon notices something strange. Leoris looks exhausted. Thinking he still has a chance, the demon desperately begins begging for mercy. He pleads that his pathetic life isn't worth wasting his majesty's magic on. Leoris doesn't even bother answering. He simply smiles, uses only a tiny fraction of his MP, and says one word: die. Instantly, the shadows tighten their grip. The screaming demon is dragged straight into hell. A second later, he crashes into a lake of molten lava. His body melts away without leaving a single trace. As the shadows disappear, the aura surrounding Leoris slowly fades. He looks at the place where the demon vanished and mutters only one word: trash. Then the little girl innocently copies him. Trash. Now that's one adorable way to finish off a demon. It seems our boy Leoris never gets a moment to rest. Because of the baby's insanely high mana density, monsters are drawn to her all night long. One after another, they keep charging at Leoris, hoping to make the little girl their next meal. By the third ambush, Leoris has had enough. He unleashes Infernum, instantly burning every monster to ashes. But the attacks don't stop. During the 13th ambush, a poor demon gets devoured by a giant beast before it can even reach them. By the 68th attack, a goblin-like monster gets ripped apart by chains of agony. And don't underestimate the baby. Believe it or not, even the little one helps take down the monsters. Another demon gets crushed by a massive demonic hand summoned by Leoris. Then another goblin gets completely obliterated by Bro Fist. Demon Fist final judgment of the 9th circle. Wave after wave keeps coming until Leoris completely runs out of MP. Under the bright moonlight, only the baby's cries echo through the night. Poor Leoris looks like a walking corpse. He's exhausted beyond belief. His body is barely standing. Then, at the worst possible moment, a flying monster suddenly dives in, snatches the baby right out of Leoris' arms, and escapes before he can even react. The creature laughs, thanking Leoris for the free meal. It keeps mocking him, trying to force him to beg for mercy. It even calls him a terrible father while bragging about eating the baby. But then, everything suddenly goes silent. The baby stops crying. She's completely calm, not even a little scared. Leoris slowly raises one hand. The monster just stares at him. What's this exhausted guy trying to do now? It keeps laughing. Then, a brilliant blue light erupts. The baby's mana is unlimited. The little potato raises her tiny hand with the biggest smile on her face as a glowing sphere of mana forms in her palm. Leoris quietly says a single word: die. In the next instant, a massive beam of blue light pierces straight through the monster, tears across the sky, and shoots so far that it disappears beyond the horizon. The monster doesn't even leave a body behind. A moment later, the baby gently floats back into Leoris' arms, still surrounded by a soft blue aura. Leoris looks down and notices something that almost makes him laugh. The cute little potato is proudly holding the monster's broken horn like it's a trophy, smiling as if she just saved the world. Even completely drained, Leoris can't help but smile. He gently praises the baby for a job well done. In the middle of the forest stood a lonely little house. Inside, Leoris was studying an ancient tome filled with the elemental symbols of the creator's power, the legendary Asta Star. According to the book, God's corpse still burned with the essence of time. Legend spoke of a chosen mortal who inherited Asta's overwhelming power. That being was known as the Istastrala. As Leoris continued reading, he suddenly thought of his beloved Ella. Somehow, her power had been transferred into the little child. Even worse, the cursed tome revealed that it would take several years before he could unlock her full potential. Once that day came, she would become the perfect sacrifice. Our boy was actually planning to sacrifice the little potato to bring Ella back. Leoris let out a long sigh. That meant he had to raise this baby for years, changing diapers, putting her to sleep, listening to non-stop crying. Just imagining it was already exhausting. At this point, Leoris declared that this tiny baby might be the greatest threat he had ever faced. And honestly, he wasn't even exaggerating. Just 2 weeks earlier, the little potato had blasted him with nuclear-level mana, leaving him unconscious and floating in the middle of a lake. Seeing no response, the little girl crawled over and gently patted his face. She kept patting him over and over, hoping he'd wake up. But when nothing happened, she tilted her head and stared at him as if he were only pretending to be asleep. Then, with the most innocent little smile, she stretched out her tiny hand and cast, who knows what kind of magic. Blue energy suddenly spread across the entire lake. Moments later, Leoris opened his eyes. Not only was he alive, but every single injury on his body had completely disappeared. He couldn't believe it. The little child simply giggled, as if healing someone from the brink of death was no big deal. At that moment, he decided there was only one thing he'd rather avoid in the future: getting smacked unconscious like a cherry ever again. Leoris sighed once more. If raising this little girl was the only way to bring Ella back, then so be it. Besides, how difficult could raising a child really be? Well, those famous last words didn't even survive 5 seconds. From her little bed, the tiny potato reached toward him and tried to speak. Leoris walked over, thinking she was about to say her first word. She looked straight at him and softly said, "Da." Leoris froze. She already saw him as her father. For the first time, he thought that maybe, just maybe, raising her wouldn't be so difficult after all. Encouraged, Leoris smiled and gently told her to say, "Dad." The little potato understood the assignment. She took a deep breath, looked right at him with sparkling eyes, and opened her mouth. But instead of saying "Dad," she shouted "Die." Mana instantly gathered in her tiny hand. Poor Leoris stood there completely dumbfounded. And before you blame the baby, remember whose fault this is. Leoris was the one who kept yelling "Die" during every single fight with monsters. Congratulations, our boy accidentally taught his daughter's first combat word instead of her first family word. Now that's what you call world-class parenting. You see, Leoris has faced wars, survived countless battles, and witnessed enough bloodshed to fill entire kingdoms. But none of that prepared him for this little potato. Right now, our boy was hiding behind a table with a pan on his head like it was some legendary artifact. He cautiously peeked out. The little devil immediately fired a mana beam. Boom! The beam punched straight through the pan, leaving a smoking hole. Leoris froze. For the first time in centuries, he had absolutely no idea what to do. Staring through the hole in the pan, he could only think one thing. In all his years of existence, nothing had ever made him this worried. Leoris tried peeking out again. Big mistake. The child instantly noticed him and fired another mana beam. This one blasted straight through the wall. At this point, our boy was running out of options. He had fought terrifying monsters, powerful heroes, and entire armies. But somehow, this little child was the most dangerous opponent he had ever faced. Inside his head, Leoris could only think, this little child is more of a monster than me. Meanwhile, the little potato was having the time of her life. She kept laughing while firing mana beams everywhere and happily shouting "Die." Yeah, definitely terrifying. Realizing brute force wasn't the answer, Leoris came up with a brilliant strategy: distraction. After all, she was still a baby. Then he grabbed a piece of broken wood and tossed it across the room. The little potato instantly took the bait. A mana beam shot toward the flying piece of wood. The moment he saw the opening, Leoris moved. Our boy lunged like his life depended on it. Because honestly, it probably did. He grabbed the toy and immediately threw it toward the child. For a second, Leoris thought his plan had worked, but then everything got worse. The little potato started firing mana beams completely out of control. Leoris stood there in shock as sweat dripped down his face. The child angrily tossed the teddy bear aside, but then she suddenly stopped, frozen in place. Why? Because her papa had arrived. Walking toward her with a blanket in hand, he calmly said, "Nap time." The most powerful spell of all. Leoris quickly covered the child and dramatically declared the technique Veil of Darkness. Sounds impressive, right? Yeah, it was literally just a blanket. But then something unexpected happened. A blue aura suddenly began leaking out from underneath it. The room started shaking. The energy kept building. And then, boom, a massive beam of magical light exploded through the house, blowing the entire roof clean off. The little potato stood in the center of the destruction, completely engulfed in magic. A terrifying expression covered her face. The smoke slowly filled the room. Then a figure stepped forward. Leoris emerged in his demon form. His expression turned serious. Because after everything that had happened, our boy finally reached a conclusion. It's time to take this little potato seriously. Before the little potato could cause even more chaos, she shot straight into the sky. Leoris immediately chased after her, attempting to stop the tiny menace before she disappeared. He even created a mana chain to capture her, but the child casually shattered it, as if it were nothing. At that moment, Leoris realized brute force alone wasn't going to work. He needed a better opening. Without wasting another second, he rushed toward the child. The moment the little potato noticed her papa approaching, she lunged straight at him. Leoris instantly slipped behind her, hoping to catch her off guard. Unfortunately for him, the little potato had already begun copying his fighting style. With unbelievable speed, speed, she instantly appeared behind Leoris while gathering mana in her tiny hands. She launched one attack after another, forcing Leoris to block every single strike. Mana balls rained down relentlessly, and as the battle dragged on, Leoris noticed something horrifying. The child's mana reserves hadn't dropped even a little. Meanwhile, his own mana had already been cut in half. Then the little potato struck a pose that looked straight out of Dragon Ball before gathering an enormous sphere of energy. The gigantic mana blast rushed toward Leoris, forcing him to barely dodge before it exploded with tremendous force. For quite some time, father and daughter continued clashing with overwhelming magical power. Every collision unleashed massive explosions that shook the battlefield. During the fight, Leoris recalled an important truth about demons. Demons require magic to maintain their physical forms, but they have no ability to generate mana themselves. Instead, they survive by absorbing magical energy from external sources. The most renewable source comes from human souls, which must be consumed to extract that power. However, the Estrella was something entirely different. It was a vessel containing god-like amounts of mana. This little child was essentially a living star, simply remaining near her naturally restored Leoris mana, much like a plant absorbing sunlight. But even that incredible benefit couldn't keep up with the overwhelming amount of mana he was spending just to defend himself. While his magic continued to drain, the little potato's mana remained completely untouched. The tiny menace happily floated through the air, laughing as she zipped around the battlefield at incredible speed. Meanwhile, poor Leoris could only stand there, carefully observing her movements. Eventually, he reached a simple conclusion. Her attacks were powerful, but they were also linear and predictable. If he simply avoided every attack, she would eventually become exhausted. Feeling confident in that plan, Leoris made one critical mistake. He underestimated the little potato. The child immediately became furious and charged forward with both hands and feet, while unleashing a barrage of energy beams from every direction. Leoris barely managed to avoid the relentless assault. One explosion after another tore apart the battlefield until the entire area collapsed into a gigantic crater. Even Leoris couldn't believe the amount of destruction created by such a tiny child. But before he had time to recover, the little potato instantly appeared directly behind him. She had closed the distance so quickly that avoiding her next attack was impossible. Then something unexpected happened. The child suddenly looked confused. She glanced around in every direction, searching for her papa, but he had completely disappeared from her sight. Leoris had secretly taken advantage of the baby's undeveloped sense of object permanence. The moment he realized she couldn't track him anymore, he discovered the one weakness that could finally end this impossible battle. Leoris immediately rushed out with a towel and wrapped the little potato before she could react. Almost instantly, the tiny menace drifted off to sleep like a peaceful little lamb. Leoris cautiously peeked inside the towel to make sure she was truly asleep. After confirming that the battle had finally ended, he let out a deep sigh of relief. Surviving this encounter made one thing painfully clear. Leoris needed to find someone who could help him control this unbelievably overpowered little potato before she destroyed something even bigger next time. The scene shifts to the past. After thousands of years of war, the mad god had finally fallen. At last, the world was supposed to enter a new era of peace and prosperity, or at least that's what everyone believed. On the very same day everyone was celebrating, the demon king marched straight into the holy capital and turned the place into a blood-soaked nightmare. The sacred halls were drenched in slaughter, and humanity could only come to one conclusion. The demons had corrupted everything. Even humanity's greatest hope, the legendary Estrella, had been turned against her own people. Normally, the magistrates would have declared war immediately if the demon king hadn't already turned every single one of them into corpses. The story then cuts to the kingdom, where a young king is discussing the destruction of the realm with Adina Valborn, the council's minister of human relations. According to Adina, the demon king's massacre was never approved by the demon council. Their investigation revealed that everything began with the former magistrates. After the demon king completed his mission of slaying the gods, they secretly planned to assassinate him. From the council's perspective, everything that happened afterward was the demon king's retaliation against that betrayal. Before Adina could continue explaining, the king suddenly interrupted the conversation by asking for milk and cookies. And that's when everyone was reminded that the new ruler of the kingdom was literally just a little kid. After happily drinking his milk, he casually requested more chocolate next time, leaving Adina completely speechless. This adorable little troublemaker was none other than King Belrose, the new ruler of Drasilis. The young king then picked up the official speech prepared for him and began reading it. However, halfway through, he suddenly admitted that he had lost his place. The room immediately fell silent. Instead of continuing, he casually tossed the script aside. Even when the butler reminded him that the speech had been carefully prepared for the future of the kingdom, the king completely ignored it and ordered the poor man to become his royal footstool. The exhausted butler simply accepted his fate, while Adina stood there wondering what kind of ruler she was dealing with. While relaxing comfortably, the little king began questioning the entire system itself. From his perspective, becoming king made absolutely no sense. He had done nothing to earn the throne, yet a 9-year-old was now expected to rule an entire kingdom, simply because every other heir had died. Adina calmly explained explained that the circumstances of his coronation were irrelevant. What truly mattered was whether he would grow into an exceptional ruler. Meanwhile, the king continued munching on cookies, as though they weren't discussing the future of an entire nation. After asking for the report again, the young king carefully thought about his responsibilities. The document stated that the demon king had to be punished, so he naturally wondered whether that punishment was truly the correct decision. Adina explained that her duty was to represent humanity before the demon council, while also representing the council before humanity. From her perspective, any sensible ruler should demand consequences for everything that had happened. At the same time, she also explained that the demon council itself was already attempting to capture their own rogue leader. Until a ritual trial officially stripped him of his title, the demon king still possessed absolute authority over every demon beneath him, including Adina herself. There was also another enormous problem. The kingdom's god-slaying weapon, the Estrella, had completely disappeared. Without someone capable of controlling her overwhelming power, she posed a threat not only to herself but potentially to all of humanity. That was precisely why the Demon Council had mobilized forces throughout every corner of Drasilis. They were searching for both the missing Estrella and the runaway Demon King. Adina further explained that demons were incredibly passionate by nature. Their current second in command was especially motivated because he stood next in line to inherit the title of Demon King. Whether through the council or someone else, the Demon King would eventually face justice. After all, actions always carried consequences, and every true ruler needed to ensure those consequences were enforced fairly. The little king quietly listened to every word before revealing why Adina's opinion mattered to him. Unlike everyone else surrounding the throne, Adina wasn't trying to manipulate him. She simply spoke honestly. Because of that, the young king decided to reveal his own past. Long before becoming King Belrose, he had lived under another name. He was once known as Prince Archin. His mother had never been permitted to bear a child because the previous king wanted to avoid another succession crisis. However, after giving birth, she chose to protect her son instead of abandoning him. To keep him alive, she abandoned her royal life entirely and escaped into the lowest slums, where the two survived under completely different identities. She lovingly called him her Archin Prince, not because he grew up in luxury, but because even in poverty, he remained her precious prince. His mother sacrificed absolutely everything so he could survive. Growing up in the slums forced him to become clever. Every single day was a struggle for survival, because if the royal family ever discovered that a bastard heir still existed, they would have eliminated him without hesitation. Then one day, everything changed. Every single person hunting him was suddenly wiped out by demon justice. Only one person survived, the bald butler. Remembering that moment, the young king proudly declared that he intended to become the greatest and most beloved ruler the realm had ever seen. His determination became so overwhelming that he literally began glowing, watching the child before her. Adina genuinely began believing that he might one day become an extraordinary king. After carefully considering everything, King Belrose finally reached his decision. He had no desire to start another war with the Demon King. However, he also couldn't ignore everything that had happened to his kingdom. As a result, he officially suspended all support and resources that the kingdom had been providing to the Demon Council until two conditions were fulfilled. The Demon King had to be brought before trial, and the Estrella had to be safely returned. Satisfied with both the fairness and maturity of that judgment, Adina respectfully praised the young king before taking her leave. Later that night, Adina finally returned to her room, hoping to relax while talking to her cat. Unfortunately for her, peace wasn't an option. Her magical communication orb suddenly began ringing. Even before answering it, she already knew exactly who was calling. The moment the connection opened, she immediately began venting her frustration over the political disaster the Demon King had created. Meanwhile, Leoris remained unbelievably calm, showing almost no concern about the chaos surrounding him. As the conversation continued, Adina informed him that because he had slaughtered every legitimate heir, the entire kingdom was now being ruled by a child. Surprisingly, Leoris admitted that he had absolutely no idea any of that had happened. Then, right in the middle of the conversation, an alarm suddenly went off. Instead of discussing politics, Leoris immediately stopped everything because it was apparently time to prepare milk. Adina had absolutely no idea what she was witnessing. The former Demon King suddenly transformed into the world's most careful babysitter, preparing a bottle with incredible precision. He even tested the milk himself to make sure the temperature was absolutely perfect before serving it. Watching one of the strongest beings in existence acting like an experienced parent completely broke Adina's brain. She simply stood there holding her cat, silently questioning everything she thought she knew. Eventually, Leoris revealed the reason behind his strange behavior. Everything he had been doing was for a child he had recently found. Naturally, that explanation only raised even more questions. Seeing Adina's confusion, Leoris finally became serious. It seemed that somewhere along the way, he had accidentally created a tiny little monster. Leoris finally told Adina everything, from the very first monster attack all the way to the latest disaster with the little potato. The more she listened, the more stunned she became. At this point, she didn't even know what to do with this absolute monster of a man. Then Leoris casually admitted that the child had learned the full extent of his personality. Silence. Adina completely froze. Seeing no reaction, Leoris asked why she wasn't saying anything. That was the final straw. Adina immediately snapped, explaining that there was absolutely no reason to expose a child to that level of violence. Children naturally copy what adults do, and every single thing they witness shapes how they grow. Leoris simply shrugged. It couldn't be helped. The monsters kept coming, and every one of them wanted to devour the child. Adina wasn't buying it. She reminded him that he possessed an entire arsenal of spells designed to escape dangerous situations. Yet somehow, both his first and his 15th solution had been different levels of brutal murder. Leoris quickly corrected her. Not 15, 50. That answer somehow made everything even worse. Even Leoris had to admit she had a point. Looking back, throwing a bunch of riffraff into a lake of fire probably wasn't one of his finest decisions. Still, he insisted it had been incredibly difficult to concentrate while a child was constantly screaming into his ears. Adina told him to slow down and explain the real problem. Children imitate everything they see, and from the moment this little girl met Leoris, the only thing she had witnessed was overwhelming violence. Naturally, she was beginning to copy him. Her behavior wasn't random. It was simply the result of the environment Leoris had created around her. Leoris didn't seem concerned in the slightest. He claimed he had witnessed far worse during his own childhood and had turned out perfectly fine. Poor Adina couldn't even find the words to respond anymore. Still trying to understand how this disaster even began, she asked where he had found the child. With the most innocent expression imaginable, Leoris casually revealed that he had destroyed an entire village. Adina stared at him, convinced he had to be joking, but the serious look on his face immediately proved otherwise. The twitch in her eye became impossible to hide. Leoris hurriedly tried to explain, asking her not to jump to conclusions and at least let him explain what had happened to the village. She wasn't having any of it. She admitted that killing magistrates who had tried to assassinate him was one thing, but she absolutely refused to listen to him justify slaughtering innocent villagers and stealing their baby. Without a hint of shame, Leoris proudly pointed out that it wasn't stealing if everyone was already dead. That was the exact moment Adina accepted the horrifying truth. In this world, God truly was dead, and the man standing before her was the one who had literally killed him. Putting the jokes aside, Leoris finally became serious and asked for Adina's help with the ridiculously overpowered child. Completely exhausted by everything she had just heard, Adina remembered that she still owned her old magic suppression armlet. She agreed to send it over and instructed Leoris to prepare all the necessary materials in the meantime. Before ending the conversation, she asked one simple question. Where was the child? Leoris silently stepped to the side. Standing behind him was the little potato. Adina leaned closer for a better look. Then she completely froze. The poor child had been tied up with rope. She immediately shouted at Leoris to untie the baby. Leoris refused. As far as he was concerned, the rope was the only thing keeping that wild animal under control. He even claimed she had no idea how long it had taken him to restrain her. At that point, Adina had completely given up. She promised to send him a few parenting books along with the armlet and firmly told him never to call her again. If the council ever discovered any of this, there would be no saving either of them. As the communication ended, Adina could only sigh to herself. Demons truly were something else. The scene suddenly shifts back to the past, where our boy Leoris is quietly holding a beautiful flower in his hand. Meanwhile, Ella is happily admiring the breathtaking field of flowers stretching endlessly before her. Seeing her smile, Leoris slowly walks over, secretly hiding the flower behind his back. The moment Ella notices him, her face lights up with excitement. She proudly reveals that she has finally completed her training and no longer needs the bracelet to suppress her overwhelming power. Not stopping there, she confidently declares that with Leoris' insanely overwhelming strength and her time magic capable of empowering them infinitely, the evil god's downfall is finally within reach. As a quiet gesture of congratulations, Leoris finally reveals the flower and offers it to her. The moment Ella sees it, she immediately recognizes it: white lilies. She explains that among humans, flowers are often given as a courting gift. Then she wonders whether Leoris even knows that each flower color carries a completely different meaning. She goes on to explain that red flowers symbolize romance, while pink flowers represent love. Either of those would have been perfect for the occasion, but instead Leoris brought white lilies. Although she says she will gladly accept them as an apology gift, she plucks one of the petals before continuing her explanation. White lilies symbolize purity and rebirth, and are most commonly associated with weddings and funerals. Poor Leoris had absolutely no idea. After all, there was still so much he didn't understand about human customs. From the perspective of an immortal, this gift practically translated into something like this: this flower reminds me of Ella. Beautiful, but fleeting. Someone I will watch wither away and disappear in the blink of an eye. The realization completely leaves poor Leoris speechless. Seeing his reaction, Ella can no longer hold it in. She immediately reveals that she was only teasing him, clearly enjoying every second of watching the mighty Demon King become completely flustered over a single flower. Then, with a gentle smile, she tosses the white lily into the air. Using her incredible time magic, countless white lilies instantly bloom across the entire field, transforming the scenery into a breathtaking sea of flowers. It becomes one of those peaceful moments Leoris wishes could last forever. Ella turns toward him with a warm smile, looking like she's about to say something important. But before a single word can leave her lips, everything suddenly stops. The beautiful memory shatters. Poor Leoris abruptly opens his eyes. Turns out, it was all just a dream, and the one responsible for ruining that precious dream was none other than the little potato. Unable to fall back asleep after having his peaceful memory completely destroyed, poor Leoris can only stand there, looking absolutely miserable and utterly annoyed. After some time, Leoris finally woke up and immediately headed toward the child, and there was little potato, crying nonstop. Leoris walked over and asked what had happened, but the moment the baby saw him, she suddenly stopped crying. She stared at Leoris for a moment, then immediately turned away, clearly refusing to face him. Before Leoris could even react, someone knocked on the door. When he opened it, he found a giant cat standing outside with a box from Adina. The cat handed over the package, then instantly transformed back into its smaller form and left. Leoris took the box inside and opened it, and inside was a bracelet designed to suppress the child's mana, a bracelet just like the one Ella had once worn. Little Potato had been watching the entire time from behind him. Then, without warning, she raised her hand and began gathering mana. As usual, she was preparing to attack Leoris. But this time, Leoris noticed her intention before she could do anything. With a quick movement, he used his magic to pull the bracelet directly onto the child's hand. Little Potato froze. She stared at the bracelet, completely confused. She had absolutely no idea what it was. Then she started shaking her arm, desperately trying to get rid of it. But unfortunately for her, the trick didn't work. Leoris watched her struggle with a satisfied expression. In his mind, he proudly declared that today, she definitely wasn't going to be firing any mana beams. But just then, Leoris noticed something above the books. It was a note from Adina. She had ordered him to read every single book, and she had specifically warned him not to even think about burning them. Meanwhile, Little Potato was still trying to fire a mana beam at him, and while doing so, she kept repeating one word with absolute determination. Die. Leoris glanced at the book in his hand. It was a parenting book. He carefully examined it for a moment. Then, in the greatest act of rebellion imaginable, he did the exact opposite of what Adina had told him, and burned the books. After that, Leoris turned toward Little Potato. She was still trying to use her mana while repeatedly chanting die. Leoris stared at her and remembered Adina's words. He needed to get this child under control. According to that cursed tome, undoing the chain of events that had led to this situation would require an almost impossible amount of time magic, and the powers this girl had obtained would probably take years to fully manifest. That meant her obedience would be extremely important. So after thinking about it carefully, Leoris decided it was time to give her a proper name. At first, he considered names like Goblina, Bertilda, Cinderella, and Lucifer. But after thinking for a while, he finally settled on the name Belle, and surprisingly, Little Potato seemed happy with it. Unfortunately, that happiness lasted for only a moment, because Leoris immediately added the last name Zebub, Beelzebub, and just like that, the child became disappointed again. Clearly annoyed by the name, she once again tried to fire her mana beam, and once again, she shouted die. At that moment, Leoris couldn't help but wonder if he should have simply left the child where he had found her. But then he remembered something. The child had been discovered beside the lilies, and he remembered how Ella had once told him that pink lilies symbolized love. With a gentle spell, Leoris carved a name into the bracelet. Then, with a faint smile, he decided that from that day forward, Little Potato would be called Lily, and judging by the child's reaction, it seemed that she actually liked the name. Later, Lily was finally sleeping peacefully. Leoris sat nearby in silence, lost in his thoughts. As he stared at the sleeping child, his mind slowly returned to the past, to his beloved Ella. Leoris had lost everything, but he still had one goal. He would undo the outcome that had taken everything away from him. He reminded himself that he and Ella still had more memories to create together. He just needed to hold on a little longer. But suddenly, there was another knock on the door. This time, it was a human maid sent by Adina. The maid handed Leoris a book, and the moment he saw it, Leoris was instantly annoyed. He let out a sigh, because he already knew exactly what was going through Adina's mind. She knew him far too well. She knew that the moment Leoris received that book, he would immediately be tempted to burn it. If you're excited for the next part, leave a comment, and I'll do my best to bring it to you as soon as possible.